everybody. This is Paul Herman, the Prince of Motivation and host of Zaka Presents My Journey. We're creating this vulnerable and positive platform where you get inspired and motivated from different leaders from our community. Today, our guest is Micha Cooper-Edwards, who is the CEO of Soleil Space. Micha, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
The pleasure is all mine, first and foremost, right? I'm going to let you know that because I know there's another Caribbean on the other side right now. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I know we're going to talk about all the great things you're doing with your company, corporate America, working with some big organizations. We're going to dive into that as well too today. But before we get into that, please let the listeners know where you're like a little bit of your cultural background and where you grew up.
Yeah, so I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago. From birth until it was time to go to college actually. So that's when I first left Trinidad to go to Washington, D.C. And attend Howard University. So I
Mm.
like to say I was well born, raised, curated, completed, you know. I'm a, I'm a Trini to the bone as
Yes, yes. We must give respect for Trinity's and thing. Trinity the board.
yeah, a lot of people actually get surprised, like, they say, "Oh, you sound so Trini, like if you just got here." And I always feel so proud of that, because I feel like I'm baked in, there's no
Yeah, that
water.
come on. Yeah, that's true. That's true. You could be like a washed out and thing
Yeah,
sometime, you
no,
know.
not washed
But
out, not
I do.
washed out.
When I'm talking to you now, I'm like, wow, the accent is strong. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And you could tell it's a Trini accent.
Right,
You
right.
know, when you walk into like a cultural environment and you just walk around, you're like, ah, Jamaican, Trini, you know, Guyanese.
Exactly.
You just know, but it feels good. But you just know everyone's different lingo and talk and thing. You know what I'm saying? Move
Yeah,
and go away.
yeah. But like I was telling you, Jamaicans, you all go from like sounding like you're born in America to sounding like you're back in the yard, right? Like no in between. And it's just a switch. It just go up and down.
we've
But
been
it's
we've
I
been
love
trained for do that. Trained
yeah,
for do that from young year. From go pick me and thing. It's just trained to do that. That is that is true. Jamaicans do know how to switch it up. The
yeah.
hat. I'm saying it's crazy. I mean, maybe we should be all actors at the end of the day, right?
Probably, probably.
Maybe I got another job out there. Maybe I should just be an actor. So it says Trinidad and Tobago. Tell a little bit more about Trinidad and Tobago. Like I know a lot of the listeners are probably listening and saying, all right, first off, they already have a vibrant energy right now. I want to know what's going on in Trinidad. Like what's the vibe in Trinidad?
Right now, currently, or just in general about Trinidad?
In general, like what's so special about Trini?
Oh, special. Well, it's just for people who don't know where it is, like physically. It's the most southerly island in the tropical Caribbean. So if you look at the map, if you use the US as a starting point, you have Cuba, you have Jamaica, you have Haiti, Dominican Republic, kind of those islands. Then there's a kind of a curve of smaller islands that goes all the way down to Venezuela. So Trinidad is right north. Trinidad and Tobago are right north of Venezuela. We say Trinidad and Tobago because it's two distinct islands, but it's one state, it's one country, right? And two islands. Um, what makes Trinidad very special? I think the biggest thing I'll say is the um, hybridity of culture in Trinidad, as well as the evolution of our colonial heritage, and that all kind of feeds into a very rich, very layered, very complex tapestry of culture, food, religion, all of it. So
Mm-hmm.
we were first Spanish, well, we were first Native American,
Yeah, true, true.
but we like to say Amerindian, and that culture is still there. There are people who still, Then we were colonized by Spain. Then we were colonized by France. Tobago switched hands between France, the Dutch, and the British. Trinidad stayed um, French for the longest and then colonized by the UK, and then became independent from Britain. And then once we became independent, servants brought from India to come and work the land. This was after slavery was abolished. And then
Hmm.
that you had merchants come from places like China, places like Syria and Lebanon. So there's the Middle Eastern, Portuguese, French. You have this mix of European, African, Asian, all coming together. And when people come from the US, they're shocked to learn that like everybody sounds like me and everybody plays mass and we have our big carnival and you just have this
That
real
is true.
interesting mix of things that come together in Trinidad. So there's a pulse to us, like we're very hot-blooded people, I like to say. Um, and we just love it. We're very
Yeah,
proud.
no, I gotta, every Trinidad in that I've ever met has always been so vibrant.
Yeah.
Like they are ready to move, right?
Yes.
There's some islands that have like a cool vibe to them. They're just like more relaxed and chill. But then Trinis are like, yes, like
Yeah.
very like get in your face and be like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Yeah,
Like,
it's a vibe because
yeah.
well, the island itself is a very well, I would say very developed, like is a kind of Trinidad, which is a bigger island, is like a city island, I will say in a lot of ways. And then Tobago is the quieter, more touristy island.
Yes,
So
yes, yes. I
a lot of
also on that.
people like think of the Caribbean and they think about that laid back kind of beaches and tourism focus, but Trinidad is not that.
Hmm.
It's very industrial,
Yeah,
a lot of commercial activity, a lot of commercial sectors that
yeah,
actually tourism isn't the main focus. So it I think that affects kind of how we live. The pace is faster than on in a lot of islands. And then because of what I just described about the culture, there's
yeah,
always so many different things going on.
yeah.
Yeah.
Especially Carnival.
Yeah, especially which is coming up, and so everybody's fetting at home, and I'm up here in the cold with a turtleneck on.
Oh, Lord, Lord, Lord. Talk to us a little bit about the childhood. How did it prepare you for your career today? Like, growing up in Trinidad, you said you were there up until you had to go to college. So,
Mhm.
like, there's a lot of life lessons that your family members probably gave to you, spoke about. Like, what prepared you for living in the States and kind of furthering your career?
Um, so my mother was a teacher, a math teacher in particular. My father was an engineer who was also a corporate executive and then later left his corporate career to pursue entrepreneurship. So that's a big kind of example that influenced me becoming an entrepreneur as well, and has actually kept me in entrepreneurship
Okay,
because the times when
it's hard to do it.
yeah, the times when you want to quit, like having somebody who's been there and doing it still is a big deal. So education was always very important to us. My mother also put us deliberately in a lot of extracurricular activities. So
Okay.
specifically sports, the arts. Though we were pretty serious in that. When I say we, so myself and my two sisters, and I also have other siblings, but the three of us, three girls, grew up in my mother's house, right?
Mhm.
And so that really, I think the education, the academic part, we underestimate the strength of the academic rigor that we get in the Caribbean. And the foundation, I think, there and the focus and the importance that was placed on it, I think put me in a place to really excel when I got to college in the US. Also, because I played sports, I was able to get part academic, part sports scholarship, and that's when I went to Howard. I was playing volleyball there because I was on the national team for Trinidad at the
Okay.
junior and senior levels, yeah. And then I was able to play in the NCAA as well. But then the artistic background, that was big too, dancing, singing. And then I also I used to paint, right? I actually
Okay.
studied it all the way to O levels, right? And I could see now how all those things really came together. So when you ask about like preparing me to go to the US and from a career slant in particular, getting into marketing, I studied international business and marketing. So that
At Howard.
yeah, at Howard. Yeah, that was
Okay.
my undergraduate degree. So that curiosity about the world, that exposure to different cultures in Trinidad, it kind of was ingrained in you to be globally, like to be globally aware, and globally curious. And even I would say culturally savvy, so like
Yeah.
going to the US, um, you realize so many people never traveled or never got exposed to certain cultures at all,
True. True. True.
and so that became kind of like an advantage in a lot of ways, and being able to adapt to new cultures was something that I felt like came somewhat naturally.
Hmm. I like how you're saying that you did all these things as a child, but a lot of those life lessons that you didn't know that it was going to benefit you, as time progressed, it started to like fall into place. Like, so for example, being a part of a sports team, you learn about leadership, you learn about connecting with a team, from being a painter, right? Being creative, knowing a little bit more about marketing, watching your father be working in a corporate environment and then becoming an entrepreneur. So like a lot of these things that we sometimes see as kids, we're like, okay, it's just is his dad moving to get another career, right? But not knowing subliminally, it's a message given to us that's going to be on our journey, right? And you obviously follow through on a lot of those things, right? So when you get to the states, you're here, you graduate from Howard. Like, talk to us a little bit more about your first job experience. Like, what was that like? That job experience career. What was it? What was that look like for you?
Well, fortunately, it was my first job in the US was working at Nike. Actually, it was before I graduated. I started as an intern. So, being an NCAA athlete, there was Nike had a this massive internship program where they would recruit from their college, college sports athletes. And so I ended up having two internships, two or three, two, right. I had two internships at Nike, first in their advertising division, then in Brown Jordan, my second time. And then I went full time to work for Nike basketball straight out of college. So I was really, really fortunate.
And
That final year that I was in school, I also, because I had worked for Brand Jordan my senior year, I was able to be their field marketing rep, bring sponsorship opportunities for them to Howard's campus, as well as support them on field marketing activities on the East Coast.
mhm.
So I was really fortunate to get that type of exposure. I mean, it was a dream come true for me as an athlete,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
somebody
yeah.
like it just brought my passions of sports and marketing together. And, Nike was a brand that I used to, that's the brand that really got me into advertising. Like I used to watch the Michael Jordan commercials and
Wow,
put
wow,
the
wow.
boxes of my shoes and like, like I studied what they did.
That's
So
nice,
it was
nice.
really huge. Yeah.
That's nice. That's nice to be able to be connected to an organization that big, right? Right out of college, right? And being an athlete, being connected to an organization like that, right? And seeing other athletes and hearing their stories, right? That's phew, that's like working for like a lot of times when people say, well, working for like Amazon, working for Google, working for you know Nike, Puma, these
Mhm.
large brands. It's beautiful. What was like one of the biggest challenges you faced navigating in the American culture? Because we talked about a little bit about Trinidad. We're talking about a little bit about how you got into like corporate America, like, but what was like one of the biggest challenges you faced with the American culture and like kind of adapting,
Mm.
blending the two, that Trinidadian rich culture to the American culture?
Yeah, I think in the US, I would say two things. One of them is a very practical thing that you don't like until you come here, you don't realize. Um, and one is a cultural thing. I think I'll start with the latter. So race plays such a big part in it charges so much in America. And of course I went to an HBCU. right? So
Yeah.
I became, it was just going to an HBCU and learning about the African American experience, which wasn't the same experience of me as a Trinidadian, right? That nuance of the Black experience. And then we would have people from other parts of the Caribbean, but people from Africa, like the whole global diaspora came together in Howard in particular. But then in the US, that reality of being Black in the US. Now, not that I
Mhm.
didn't know I was Black in Trinidad. My father was part of the Black Power movement in Trinidad, but you know, it wasn't as restrictive and as oppressive, obviously, because in Trinidad we are not a minority. We are one of
True,
the
true, true, true.
two majorities, right? So that dynamic is very different. And learning about the history of the African American experience, I think how
Important.
race permeates everything, and then that sub aspect of being a Black female in America, I think that then became a big learning once I got into corporate America and learning about, like, you know, how women are treated in the workplace and like
Yeah,
different
yeah,
navigations of power in corporate America. I would say those are
yeah.
the two biggest. The cold was a big thing, and that's and I
We
used
we we
to,
not gonna get into. I think every Caribbean person that
yeah,
comes up here never expects it to be this cold. And
yeah,
every time someone from my family arrives back in or comes to the States, we have the coldest winter.
yeah.
We have the coldest winter. At one point the winter was like 60 degrees, 50, 45.
And it's so
Now
cold.
it's 13. Now it's
Right.
10. It's
So
8.
true. That's so true.
They're
But
walking in like, what?
yeah, but the thing about the cold is not just about being cold. The cold affects how people live, how people interact with each other. It affects the culture, right? It affects how people operate, right? And your
Yeah.
freedom to do things, right? Like simple things like passing people in the street and not saying good morning because you're cold, you're looking down, you're inward, you're trying to stay warm, your hands in your pocket, and you're
Good
not looking sideways. Like you're
good
just trying to get to where you're going as
good
quickly
way
as
of breaking it
possible.
down.
Yeah.
Good way of breaking it down because
Yeah, so that's a thing. It's a real thing, and it
yeah.
it it was isolating, at times. And I say the last thing is credit. Like the credit influences so much, and I didn't have anybody to really explain to me how credit worked.
Yeah.
So, I got this stupid Capital One card and didn't realize
Uh-oh.
that,
Uh-oh.
and all of that, and like busted my credits and had to build it back up and the whole thing. And that's
Everyone has the same trauma story. They
yeah,
got a
yeah,
Discover card, they got a Visa, they got a Capital One, they got something. And it was
yeah,
right in college when someone said, you need a credit card. And you're
exactly.
like, "Wait, oh my gosh, I don't have to spend my own money, right?
Mhm, mhm.
There needs to be like someone to say, don't do this.
Yes,
Or
for
if
sure.
you do it,
How
it's
do
a
you do it? Yeah,
yeah,
because you have to do it. That's the other kind of crazy thing. It's kind of dumb, but it's like, oh, you have no credit, so you need credit.
yeah,
And
yeah.
when you get credit, you can't afford to pay the credit. It was like, this is a trap, you know?
Whew.
So
Well, I
someone
can
tell you
see
what to do.
with
Yeah.
all the stress with all of that, I can see why you have moved into the entrepreneur side of things. So
Mm.
talk to us now a little bit more about your company, Soleil Space, and what was the mechanics behind building it.
Yeah. Well, when I left Nike, actually, my last role there, I was over the international footwear business for brand Jordan, right? And so through that role, I had gotten I was traveling all over the world, working with, different teams in Asia, I mean, all over, right? But what it afforded me was a really great understanding and exposure to different cultures within that kind of corporate setting. And even in my roles in Nike basketball and Nike sportswear, I realized that I always was on this, I was always on the global side of the businesses,
Okay.
but I also was playing this role of being this advocate for the international regions or for countries, especially global south or emerging markets that weren't getting prioritized, or athletes from those markets that weren't being, their stories weren't being really focused on or invested in. So this is a thread that ran through. And when I left Nike, I didn't go into entrepreneurship right away.
Took some
I
time.
Yeah, well, I worked with my dad first. He has a steel pan export and manufacturing company. It was the first of its kind to mass produce and export the instrument all over the world. So I worked with him. Our generational gap was a bit too wide. And then I went back into corporate and worked for some big FMCG brands
Okay.
like Diageo, Kraft.
Oh yeah. Okay, Diageo.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
nice one right there.
Yeah. So I had felt like at that time and this was back in Trinidad as well, but working with large distributors that will represent those brands in the
Yeah.
Caribbean. So I had worked on the global side of, corporate marketing. I worked in the US. I worked in the territory. I felt like I'd been there, done that. And I
Okay.
also worked in different functions of marketing. So advertising, product, merchandising, et cetera, et cetera.
It's important to move around.
Yeah. So I always kind of felt like I got tired of commercial storytelling. It was happening from since I was at Nike, where I would want to tell like a lot bigger, deeper stories. And, you're just restricted by the commercial cycle of it all.
Yeah.
And so I decided I was going to quit that career. And I always wanted to study media because I was always passionate about film and TV. Um, and
Artist.
I decided to go back to school. So I went to London, did my master's in media and communications, and specifically my thesis was in Nigerian film. And that gave me which we call Nollywood. But gave me the opportunity to study the global film industry, but through the perspective of
Okay. Okay.
African film and specifically Nigerian film, which, Nollywood is a popular genre of African
Yeah.
film. And at the time, Nollywood hadn't really penetrated the West in the formal ways. It
Okay.
was all the pirated DVDs, bootlegs, selling in Brooklyn in a little shop somewhere, right? But it was pushing up against it. And I was studying what were the resisting factors to receive Nollywood into the formal global networks, but also what were the kind of dynamics when it came to the Black diaspora audience and how those things intersected. So it really blew my mind wide open because first I discovered that there's an African film industry that,
True.
as a Black person growing up in the Western Hemisphere, who knew? We don't see it, right?
Yeah. 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 True. Oh,
And
it's not talked about.
not talked about, but I
Yeah.
never saw an African film. And then the other piece of it was, you know, I realized that there are all these other realms of film and TV around the world that weren't really seen by the diasporas of those cultures. So Turkish film, Middle Eastern film, Bollywood, well, we got some of that in Trinidad because of the big Indian
The mixed
population.
pop.
Yeah, but Asian, right? Korean film, all of it, like there was so much, right? So I left that program through the thesis. I was able to develop relationships with directors, producers, etc. Because I was into, they were my subjects for my thesis, and one of them, a director, British Nigerian director, was like, you'll make a great producer. So I was like, what does a producer do? And then,
See, this is again. This is how
yeah,
you know. This is how you
yeah,
know. No
yeah.
one's breaking it down to us. We're
Well,
like,
I
wait.
was
So
like, what is a producer? Like you see it you're watching a movie, you see producer, you don't know what the difference between the producer and the director. The producer is the person who basically that's the entrepreneur of a film. A film is a business. Every film is a
Yeah.
business
Yeah. 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 I give you that.
in itself, right? It's an entrepreneurial project in to some level. So that's when I started producing. I started producing on his series. Then I went back to New York and I started doing my own independent producing. And then I worked for a big production studio in Brooklyn, in New York. And basically, like I had kind of gone to the point where I wanted to tell my type of stories, and there was a little deal where they were supposed to support some of the independent projects that I had. That didn't quite happen. And so
Oh
that's when,
Lord. Corporate
yeah,
America.
yeah, exactly. And that's when I decided, I'm gonna start my own production company. This is without really knowing
Okay.
what I was doing, quite frankly. And dove into the deep end, started developing film and TV projects, was doing branded content as well. And then
Okay.
that took
Okay.
us up to 2020. And the pandemic hit. And at that time, we had about 15 projects we were working on that got shut down. Um, but during this process of being a producer in Hollywood and in New York, I came face to face with all of the systemic barriers that affect,
Mm.
filmmakers of color in particular in the industry.
And we're gonna talk more about that because that's a
Yeah,
big one. That's a big one.
yeah.
You think when you thought you made it, but then it's like, no, you didn't. You just really
Oh,
thought.
yeah. It's a whole
It's like,
other.
yeah, there's so many more steps to take, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
sometimes when we get to a place where we could actually acknowledge what we have done, we're like, wow, look around, I actually made it. But then you look and you're like, wait, there's a lot more to go.
There's a whole other mountain that you didn't see.
Yeah, that's uh-oh,
Like you
uh-oh.
climb the hill and then
Yeah, 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 yeah.
you look
Yeah,
up and you
you
see
get
the
over
mountain.
that little hump and you're like, woo,
Ex-
that was a little run right there. But then you look,
Yeah,
you're like, where this mountain come from? But
yeah.
you're right. It is, and it's and since you were in corporate America, you were able to move around and see different energies and feel different energies, right? So it helps you out in regards to your business, to help out with any of those situations right there. But that's oof.
Yeah.
The
Well, basically, just to finish that loop, basically, that was my stint as a producer. And then once we got interrupted by COVID was and combining those experiences was what led me to say, you know what, I want to build this tech platform
Mhm.
because I realized that the people that control the industry control financing and distribution. That's where the axis of control is. And if we could own distribution in an innovative way,
Yeah, yeah.
that could
Fun
be
way, a
a
creative
solution.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. I'm loving the fact that you broke down a lot of greatness. You broke down a little bit of that journey for us, and you talked about the systemic challenges, right, that independent filmmakers and storytellers have, right? Gaining access to the ownership of their own stuff in the entertainment industry. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Because that was like a something that I know has come up in previous conversations in the show and stuff like that. So you could give us your input on that.
Yeah. So they're they're kind of course, the industry is very vast and complicated, but if I were to just boil it down to illustrate, there are two ways you could kind of go about making films. You could do it as part of the studio system, where somebody commissions or hires you as a work for hire for a project for a big studio, and it's their idea, and they're just hiring people to create the idea, right?
Okay.
And then there's independent film, right? Where you are an author, right? And you originate your concepts and you bring people on and you hire this independent crew and cast, etc. And then, and it may be acquired by a studio, right? Down the road. But the journey of the film, it originates as an independent project, right? So our focus, start to make that delineation because our focus is on independent films, right?
Own
And independent filmmakers. And so to answer your question, there's particularly, and our focus is also around filmmakers of color, right? Because the problem we wanted to solve was why don't we see more of our stories being told, but not just quantity, but quality and authenticity of the stories, right? Like
Give me
the
that.
type of representation, right, that we
Give me that.
see
Yeah.
is not nuanced enough, right? And it doesn't capture the realities of who we are, right? It captures a lot of stereotypes about who we are and push those stereotypes out. So the challenges for indie filmmakers, really the journey that they are taught to go on is to make your film, you could raise some money or you could scrape your stuff together and be that kind of hungry filmmaker and apply to film festivals and hope that you get into the film festivals and then go through the film festival circuit, which could take you a year or two or three in
That is
some
true.
cases.
That's true.
So while I'm describing this, the numbers that are adding up in terms of your own money, your own survival, your own lack of income, right? This is time is going, but
But
money,
that's that entrepreneur life that people just don't know. It's
yeah.
gonna hit them.
Yeah. And so that culminates to and this is actually one of the basic premises of us launching Soleil Space, which is that 70% of independent films by filmmakers of color that get into the top 20 film festivals get no distribution. And to get into these top film festivals, that's a high bar of critical acclaim,
Yeah,
quality,
yeah, 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 yeah.
etc. There's also a lot of politics involved, right?
Which we know when
These
it is
days.
corporate.
Yeah. So to meet that bar and then nobody else gets to see your film. And for the most part, the people that go to the film festivals aren't the people in the community that you made the film for or made the film about, right? And so that is a huge cliff. And you're talking about over 2,000 films a year that get produced and get to this level and then get buried. They just, nobody around the world sees it, right? So
Okay.
that is an issue. But then even when they do get distribution, getting global distribution and actually getting proper monetization for that work and getting promoted on the platform. So think about it as like a funnel that just gets tinier and tinier
Yeah,
in
I can
terms
see
of
that.
reaching that audience and making money off of the film. Yeah.
Thanks. And when you're talking about all these things, it makes me say to myself, like, there needs to be some type of place, a hub, a platform that can kind of give people this type of information so they can structure themselves the right way, so they can enter into these film festivals. Yes, the number is pretty small at first, but if you're putting the right stuff in, then the number gets even bigger
Mhm.
because more people are being accepted in. But again, it's one of those things. Now, I know that like you mentioned about the whole thing about working for like Jordan, working for some of these other large companies, right? Do you feel that those companies kind of got you even more inclined in a to be this entrepreneur that you are today? I know you watch your
Yeah,
father, right?
yeah,
And being in
definitely.
these environments, do you feel like it kind of prepped you for what you're going through?
Yeah, I don't think it was like conscious preparation on their part. I think it was, I will say these are the things that I'm able to leverage in my entrepreneurial experience. One, Nike in particular, innovation was just so important and it drove everything, right? So
Well, Nike pushes the boundary, the
correct.
borders, right? The
Yeah.
bound,
So
they go all the way.
that culture of innovation became ingrained in me. And to work for them fresh out of college, that was like that's like your formation years in corporate, right? So that became very ingrained in me and so continued with me. Also, I would say how to build a company. Like I don't do things with Soleil Space as though we're a little company. Like I build a company as though it's going
Yeah,
to be a multi-billion dollar company,
you
right?
must.
Because I know what scaling has to look like when we get big. I want these things the foundation to be strong, and I want us to be able to ease into that transition as we grow, right?
Yeah.
So I think that was also a big one. And then just the spirit of entrepreneurship in terms of like a very matrix environment that allowed you to kind of come up with the biggest ideas and navigate and talk to whoever you need to and make things happen. I heard Nike's not like that anymore, but when I was there,
Because
it
you're
was
not there.
very much encouraging, like yeah, independent kind of like I like to say entrepreneurship.
They, I mean, I think a lot of those larger companies, maybe even after COVID, they made a couple of changes, social media. definitely changed the game.
Mhm.
AI changed the game. So there's a lot of things that factor in regards to these companies not having that same type of energy that they used to have. But again, it definitely works as it's a global brand that people are buying Jordans every single day, every single minute. I forgot what the statistics were about how many Jordans were purchased, within a year or one every second or every minute. It was some astronomical stuff. I was like, wow.
Becoming crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
They
But
sell
shout
a
out to
lot
them.
more than they used to.
Shout out
Um,
to that. Shout out
yeah.
to that.
I think they
I'm
kind of flooded the market, but that's a whole other conversation.
we're not
They're
gonna
not
talk
as
about
exclusive as they used to be. Yeah.
that. I know that you, in your building your business, something that's important to you is like, elevating the underrepresented voices that are out there. Like, what is some of the things that you do to kind of help elevate that?
Yeah, so I like to call Soleil Space an ecosystem, a tech media ecosystem. So we have several different media properties, but the core of it is the community streaming platform that we built.
Okay.
So that is the first destination for independent films by filmmakers of color that center around communities of color around the world. We like to say the global South diaspora. So those who are immigrants, migrants, and descendants and residents of Asia, Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, Middle East. So that cross-cultural kind of destination of having those films all in one place, it's to encourage global audiences first to have access
Okay.
to them. And these are films that I just described, that 2,000 a year that come out to the film festival circuit. That is what we curate and we offer to audiences, but we also brought in innovation around how people experience the film. So it's not a
Okay.
traditional streaming
Yeah.
experience. It
Yeah. Yeah.
allows you to interact. It allows you to travel to different regions of the world and dive into these realms of film. You could
Yeah. Very
directly engage with
interactive,
filmmakers.
immersive.
Yeah, exactly. Very interactive, immersive, and geographical exploration. You kind of bring all those things together.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. 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 Next question I'm gonna pull up on this right here is the entertainment industry is obviously shifting, right? I talked about a little bit earlier about AI. I definitely want to kind of get your thoughts on it because I could see I wish and you can't trust everything online, but I know that there's been times when I've seen things where, someone writes a little says they talking to their phone and say, write me a screenplay, for this, and then make a movie about it, and then all of a sudden AI just generates it, right? So want to kind of get a little bit more of your understanding, like what are some of the biggest challenges that you see coming up?
Yeah, I actually did an interview with Medium, the Authority magazine. It's this is part shameless plug, but partly because it's such a big a big topic
Yeah,
that
yeah,
there
yeah,
are
yeah.
a lot of things to it. So I would encourage people to read that because it talks about like protecting your IP, and I talk a lot about AI in particular in that.
Okay.
But just to kind of give you a couple nuggets from it, it AI has there's some myths and there's some realities. The myths are that AI could just be truly creative. AI is not that creative. AI, what it does, it depends on data that's inputted into a model, right?
Yeah,
Now, the challenge that poses is that the data that it pulls, right, is not most of the time will not be protected. And even if it is IP, it's very hard to control what the AI models have access to, right? And so as a filmmaker, if I would have done a creative work, a script, a finished film, etc., right? How do I protect my data, my product, so that from being inputted into an AI model that could then replicate it or that could
yeah.
then
Your
do
intellectual
something that's an
property right there.
evolution on that, right? So it's not necessarily it's replacing the filmmaker from the perspective of work that has been done, right? But in terms of future creativity, I think there's where there's the opportunity where now you could use AI as a tool, right, to accelerate your creative output as a filmmaker, right? And there's specific things that it does give you advantages in terms of, getting things done quickly, getting things done more efficiently, and
Yeah,
from a
yeah, yeah.
cost perspective and all of that. So it's really like for filmmakers to educate themselves on the pros and cons of it, right? And using it to their advantage. And I think the AI companies, and we are actually doing AI integration now into our platform.
That's
And
okay.
one
Yeah,
of the
good.
things that I'm very big on is that we are going to be a responsible AI company, meaning our use of AI is to empower filmmakers, not to replace the filmmaker. So there are kind of two sides of it, and there's a divide around it in terms of not just how filmmakers use it and how they're vulnerable to it, but also from a corporate standpoint, who's
Yeah,
using it to abuse and exploit as opposed who's using it to empower.
yeah. Wow. Okay. 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 Come on, Soleil. Soleil Space. Come on. Come
Yeah,
on.
we're coming, we're
Yeah,
coming.
yeah, we're coming in, we're coming in, we're coming
We're
in,
coming
yeah,
again.
we're coming in, coming in the road. Don't
Yeah.
start, don't start, don't start, don't
You
start.
don't start. I'll start singing, and that's not what this is for. We're not
You
supposed
said you were singing, you were an artist, you know what I'm saying? You said you painted. So when you said the words to come in, I said, hold up. I didn't know if you were trying to tell me to sing, would you?
I'm glad you did. I'm glad you did. That was good. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay. Well, congratulations on the company.
Thank you.
Right. I feel like you got your hands full over there, right?
Yes,
And you
definitely.
you're doing a really good job juggling it. And you're the best person for the job, to be honest with you, right? Think about all the things that you've been through, the growth spurs, the hardships, watching from the sidelines and paying attention, like you utilizing all these things, being in the university, being at your first job. So like now you're in a place, you're like, okay, and you're at a place too where you're like, you should use AI. Use it for the right reasons. Be mindful of how much you use it. You don't want to use it too much.
Right.
But you still know that there's a level of creativity that the person physically has inside of them, that it shouldn't just be relying on like, hey, look, talking to the phone, do this for me and make it happen, because the sense
Right.
of feeling is disconnected, right? AI is not that, well, from my understanding. AI is not at that level to produce something like that. So I'm glad
Mhm.
that you're at that forefront of helping to bridge that gap.
Yes, definitely.
You've been recognized, in a lot of great platforms, obviously, at your company, right? But let's talk about this Forbes, right? Forbes next, I think it's next 1,000.
Yes,
So
yeah.
just being highlighted in Forbes is already nice, right? Now you're in the next 1,000, right? In the innovative and media category, like, so how do you feel? That's a fairly big accomplishment, right? And then also being a woman of color in that position.
I have mixed feelings around it. Of course, it's great. It's a really good accomplishment, recognition. Um, at the time that I received it, I was actually in Trinidad, so there was a lot of buzz around that. And, a minister
Was
of government called me personally, had me come into her office and sit with me and, all of this. So that was really cool to like bring that I'm not sure how many Trinis have been in Forbes list, but I may have, if not the first one of the few. So that was really nice. I
okay.
think personally though, I feel like the accolades need to catch up to my expectation of where I want to be. So sometimes there's a disconnect for me in terms of like, okay, yeah, you get this recognition, but we're not quite, I feel like I'm not there yet in terms of like what I know we want to accomplish with Soleil Space, you know?
Okay, I got you.
And there's sometimes a tension in my head where I have to coach myself and say, no, it's okay. Like what you've accomplished so far is worthy of that, you know? And the rest will come. But I'm impatient that way, like I feel like,
It's the Trini in you.
yeah, probably.
Ready,
Yeah,
ready to go. Ready.
probably.
You
Yeah.
see, Trini, you see, as a child, it was a good thing, right? But now in your adulthood, you're like, I gotta move, I gotta go. You see, but it's
Yes.
a good thing. It goes both ways. So again, I'm just gonna say good high vibrations to the Trini culture right there. Just gonna
Yeah.
get at me.
Now I want Forbes level capital to go into the company. And then it'll be like, okay, fine. I could be in all the magazines that you want me to be, you know?
Hey, like I'm
Yeah.
trying to get in one of them right now.
Hmm.
Look, but that's a big thing, and to know that you came from Trinidad, like I said, you're in Trinidad, you're there up until like the age of like 17, 18. You go to college, you get in there, you're in Howard, one of the most prestigious universities in that area, right? And then right into Nike, into corporate America, then the entrepreneurship role, life that you live in, providing a safe platform to help other people, provide educating, which is very important. Sometimes it's a lot of people that once we get to a certain place, from climbing from the bottom, we start to gatekeep, but you're not doing that. You're like, hey, look, here's the information. This is how I can help. This is how I can help. And that is very, very, very important. And I feel like that is a great thing to have as a leader, great thing to have as someone who can mentor people. So kudos to you and all the success that you've been having, right? It's like, you
You,
know,
you.
in this short conversation that we're having, I'm like, okay, leveling up. Every time is a level up.
Yeah.
Leveling up. Like your worth, which is very important to a lot of us as first or second generation immigrants, knowing our worth, knowing how to advocate for ourselves, knowing how to speak up, knowing how to know when is the right time to make that move. Right.
Mhm.
And sometimes we never know when the right move is, right? We're like, oh, do I move now? Just that thought process. And I'm loving the fact that how you talked about that transition from corporate into being an entrepreneur. You said it just didn't start. It's not like you just left corporate and you were there. You said it was a transition, it was a time frame, right? And I think that's important to let people know, like, not everybody just leaves corporate on Monday and they're
Mhm.
in their entrepreneurship job role on Tuesday. It doesn't
Mhm.
happen like that, right?
And entrepreneurship is hard. A lot of people, don't realize that it is the least glamorous thing that you could do. People think the opposite. They think they see the Forbes, right? And all of that. But they don't know that when I got the Forbes award, I was like looking crazy on a deadline, trying to debug something with my engineers in India, up all night, 24-hour cycles, not sleeping. Like that is what people don't realize. And so
Yeah.
yeah, like
That,
they get enticed by the ownership and the perceived power of it, but it's actually the most humbling experience you could have because it strips you bare and it shows you all your strengths, all your weaknesses.
you know what I think it is? I think you kind of helped me think about it too. It's the title. You know how people want long names? Like
Mhm.
Dr. Herman of Medical Care Science and Department of, like, they want the long. So entrepreneurship, it's a long word. So if you could put that next to your name, you're like, ooh, that sounds nice. But again, if you don't really know what's in store for you, and everyone's journey is different, but it's
Yes.
important to hear everyone's journey. It's important to hear multiple journeys. And
Mhm.
that's why I'm so blessed to have you on the show today to kind of like enlighten us a little bit more about that. But yeah, I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you so much for just taking your time and just being here and being present, sharing the Trini vibrant energy that you got, right?
Thank
At
you. Thank
at
you.
throughout the whole conversation, I'm like, okay, like let's go.
Yeah, it's a vibe. You have to, that's what we do. That's how we do it. No, but thanks a lot. And thanks for this platform, you and Greg and your team. It's so
Thank you.
important, especially now with what's happening in the world and in America. So
Don't get
important.
us started right now.
Yeah, that's the
We
next
could
one. Maybe
th-
we
th-
could just have a
next.
a group podcast about what's going on.
I
I recommend you guys do that. Like,
shout out to you. You got
yeah.
your dual citizenship, right?
No, not yet, actually.
Oh, you still got your Trinity passport?
Yes, but I have
Oh,
my interview on the 20th for my citizenship. You believe
okay,
that?
I'm about to say, look, just keep the Trinity one close.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but
Yeah,
thanks
yeah,
a
yeah.
lot. This was great. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no, you did a wonderful job, and I just want to let the listeners know, like, is there before we actually leave off, is there any other fine words that you want to kind of share with our listeners? Obviously, whether it be about the company or in general, individuals that are stepping into those roles just like yourself.
Yeah, I would say, well, two things. I would say everything that brought you to that point is you can use. And, being an immigrant, I think, is a superpower because we've gone through the risk taking, we've left what we know. And that's something that, especially today, we should stand very firm and confident in that we have superpowers that nobody else has. Our culture is a superpower, our cultures are assets, and we need to be united and have solidarity with each other, I think, more now than ever. So that's one. Two, I'd love for everybody to check out Soleil Space. You could and support filmmakers from all around the world, filmmakers of color in particular, that come from these backgrounds that we come from, and tell stories of immigration, but also local stories, and share it because it will not just support me but support the filmmakers that are on the platform as well. So go on and let us know what you think. Soleilspace.com, SOLEIL space.com.
You better spell it out for them.
Yeah,
You,
you have to
you
get it
better,
right.
you better spell it out for them. Come on now. Well,
Yeah,
congratulations again, Micha. Thank you so much for
thank
just being
you.
present again. And I want to let the listeners know if you want to hear more inspirational stories, again, like Micha, please check us out on ZakaConnect.com. Follow our social at Zaka Connect and follow our feed, Zaka, wherever you listen to your podcasts.